So I'm from a very small town in Vermont. So small, in fact, that we've got one paved road, no police, and no government. So every March, the whole town gets together for a town hall meeting. And for 2 days, they debate how much money is going to go to the school, which land will be available for sale, which parts are owned by the town, and how much will go to certain roads or other types of projects, and ultimately which businesses will be allowed to start up and under what conditions. So this was my introduction to politics and my introduction to economics. So to me, they were clearly one and the same. They fundamentally interconnected with one another. So you can only imagine my horror when I went to college and I realized that there was an idea out there that the economy is somehow very separate from politics. It's governed by its own superior rules, and therefore politics should really have nothing to do with it. So this idea has been around for quite a while, but it really came back with a vengeance in the 80s, particularly with Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK. And so the fundamental point of this idea was that governments should really take a hands-off approach to the economy, because it was best served for economic affairs to just deal with their own thing. But what this meant in practice was that in the US and the UK, there was a complete dissolution of labor unions, like really the government tried to suppress them and any other collective organizations that would intervene in business activities. There was also a huge rolling back of the state in terms of providing for certain social services and saying that we shouldn't be regulating corporations and finance so much, and let's mostly just focus on free trade. And so this approach has been commonly called neoliberalism by a lot of its critics. And this was forced onto countries all around the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America, by the World Bank and the IMF. So the effects of this economic policy approach were disastrous for a lot of people. And I'm not going to get into all of the reasons today, but what I really want to focus on is the implications for democracy that have come from it. The idea that the government should not intervene in the economy is fundamentally anti-democratic. Because if a population believes that, let's say, certain goods like water or basic food or things like this should be secured and supplied by the government, then the government should do so. If people believe that there should be a certain code of ethics or conduct that apply to the way that things are produced or exchanged or distributed, then the government should implement that. But the issue actually goes much farther than this, because as a result of this policy approach, that at first was just theoretical, corporations, particularly transnational corporations, were given the freedom to do more or less whatever they wanted for the past 30 years. And the effect of this has been that in 1990, corporations owned $4 trillion. By 2013, transnational corporations owned $97 trillion. Okay, so to put this figure into context, if all of the money in the world that was generated this year by all of the people and all of the countries was put together in a fund, this would still not be enough to buy the transnational corporations. What this has meant is that now there are particular corporations which are bigger and stronger and richer than entire countries. So right now, Walmart, for example, is the 7th largest trading partner with China, ahead of the United Kingdom. So China cares a little more about what Walmart wants than about what the United Kingdom cares about. The major problem with this is that we've allowed for corporations to become these giant economic giants, but we have not developed any type of parallel institution which has any power to regulate them. And in fact, we've created a global economic institution called the World Trade Organization, the WTO, which does pretty much the opposite. But this is actually a talk for another day. So as corporations have gotten larger and larger and richer, around the world, there's become the situation where governments say they have to create a business-friendly environment, because otherwise they won't be able to track these corporations, or they'll immediately flee and go somewhere else. So to be clear, a business-friendly environment translates into little to no environmental regulations, labor regulations, taxation, or really any sort of oversight on trade or imports or anything that might be beneficial to these entities. So while initially this was just a theoretical idea that government shouldn't intervene in the economy or in corporate affairs, it's kind of become its own self-fulfilling prophecy, because now, even if people say that they should, governments are like, oh, but we can't really. Yeah? Like, they're going to leave, or they won't come here, and we really want a little bit of that $97 trillion. Yeah? So in my work, I travel around the world a lot, and I get to see these policies in practice. So in Burkina Faso, for example, every year there is massive amounts of mining for gold, which is worth billions of dollars. But these mining companies don't have to pay a single dollar in tax for the first 10 years at least. And during this entire exploration, they don't have to abide by any type of environmental regulations. But this isn't just a situation in developing countries, although they've certainly been screwed the most with this. In the United States, even now, we are constantly hearing both Hillary and Trump, in different manners, talk about how we really need to make sure that we create an attractive environment for corporations so that they'll come back, or so that they'll prosper globally. It's in this way that economic democracy has really been undermined, because governments are now far more concerned with crafting policies that are good for these corporations than they are about crafting policies which are good for us as people. And we're all just pretty much pandering to the interests of these corporate entities that have zero accountability. So if I moved here, let's say, and I set up my residence, and I poisoned the lake beside my house, and I enslaved a couple people, and on top I refused to pay taxes, I would definitely go to jail. Yeah? But this happens a lot with corporations, and at worst they pay a fine, but most of the time they just leave. Yeah? Because we don't have any type of global governance institution which holds them accountable. Okay, so I know that this situation sounds really bad, but in fact it gets kind of worse. So I don't know, but maybe a lot of you, especially Americans, are familiar with the North American Free Trade Agreement. So NAFTA was signed under Bill Clinton. And this was a one of the historic trade agreements of our time. And what it allowed was for the free mobility of finance, production, and any type of investment, but not people, between Canada, the US, and Mexico. And this was the very first trade agreement, which included something called the Investor-State Dispute Settlement System. The Investor-State Dispute Settlement System is one of the worst things that has ever existed. Yeah, I'm really, really confident with this. So what it says is that pretty much any corporation is allowed to sue a government for any law that they institute, which they say infringes or reduces their expected profits. Yes. Okay? So the way this works is that if you've signed an IDSD, a foreign company is given the right to go to a secret tribunal of corporate lawyers and to demand compensation from a government if they pass a law which is trying to prohibit smoking, which might be trying to protect the environment, or even which is trying to ward off a nuclear catastrophe. Yeah? So examples of things that have happened is Canada was forced to pay $20 million to a corporation because they instituted a ban on the export of toxic waste. Okay? Yeah. Ecuador was forced to pay $2 billion to an oil company because after huge amounts of activism by their their citizens, they decided not to drill in the Amazon. Yeah. So let me reiterate this, yeah? The people of Ecuador, with their taxpayer dollars, had to pay an oil company $2 billion because they didn't want to destroy the Amazon. So why does this matter? And why am I using this time right now? What can you do about it? Yeah? That this clause is included in the 3 biggest trade agreements right now in history. Yeah? So I think pretty much every single one of us is from a country which is negotiating a trade agreement which has this as a clause. So the TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is with the US and a lot of other Pacific states, and also the like Peru and Chile. The CETA, which is between the EU and Canada, and also the TTIP, which is between the US and the EU. This is included in all of these. So this is really going to be the end of democracy if this happens. So right now, there's been huge amounts of activism in Europe, and it has made inroads. Yeah? Like just 2 days ago, there's one state in Belgium which was just like, nah, this CETA thing, this is bullshit. Yeah? And as a result of this one state, the whole of the EU may not be able to pass this deal with Canada. Yeah? But right now in the US, particularly for you Americans here, this is Obama's #1 thing. He is pushing this so hard. And if this passes, I need to be clear, this would mean that if we tried to raise, let's say, our minimum wage to $15, if we tried to force the labeling of GMOs, or tried to reduce environmental degradation in some way, we would have to pay a corporation for that. Yeah? And massive amounts, huge amounts. So, I think that it's important to be clear that right now, you have an opportunity, because they haven't passed yet, yeah? To please go sign an online petition, or even better, write to your representative. Just say that you don't want this trade agreement, yeah? But even beyond this, I think it's important to recognize that there's a reason why these clauses are being included in every single major trade agreement. Transnational corporations are very strategic and organized, and they have a vision for the future where there will be this global court that all countries are subject to, and they will be allowed to force every single country in the world to create policies, economic policies, which are in line with their interests, not with the interests of us as citizens. But I really believe that we're a unique organization. I mean, generation, yeah? And potential organization. Because we're frustrated, yeah? And I know that we're not always so clear on exactly how and what outlets, but we have different values. And we really believe that the current system is not working. And I think that we have the possibility to mobilize and to not just be on the defensive and say, okay, well, we don't want this trade agreement, we don't want this trade agreement, but actually say, yeah, you know, actually we do agree with you that there should be a court. But I don't think it should be governed by you corporations. I think it should be governed by us. Yeah? I believe that there should be an organization in the world which holds you accountable, no matter where you go in the world, for a certain code of conduct, to respect human rights and to respect the rights of a community, because we know you can afford it. Yeah? So Philip spoke last week a bit about the need for a global solidarity movement. And I think it's important to recognize that now our economy is fundamentally global, and the players who are increasingly controlling it are global. And so we have to look beyond our national borders and to recognize that all of us just want to live a life of freedom and dignity. And that we have the power, and really there's a huge responsibility, to try to make sure that we fight against any powers that might be trying to take away that voice and take away that freedom. So I really believe that this is one of the greatest challenges of our time, and so I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. But if we're able to transform our values, to take back economic democracy, and to demand that governments regulate the economy in line with our values and interests, not those of foreign companies, then we can make such a difference.